what we think of your flag. Free, free Palestine! Free, free Palestine! Free, free Palestine!
Get the fuck back! Don't burn the American flag!
Yeah, we already did!
Don't burn the American flag! Get the fuck back! Don't burn the American flag!
Yeah, we already did!
And your it's our country! It's our country!
This country! Burn it down! Burn it down!
You guys are the enemy! Don't burn the
The butchers of Gaza, the Democratic Party. Look at democracy around you. Press, look at the democracy. There's young kids around here. Shut down the DNC!
Shut down the DNC!
What has happened to the city of Chicago over the past decade is nothing short of tragic. I mean, I lived there from 2013 to 2016. It was not exactly a paradise when it comes to crime and law and order, but from then compared to now, it is truly like night and day. The current mayor, Brandon Johnson, makes his predecessor, Lori Lightfoot, look positively conservative, and she was a leftist nutjob herself. The current guy is calling in all the pro-Hamas troops. They are not enforcing the law there in Chicago at all whatsoever. By the way, there was a small group here called the IAC, the Israeli American Council. They've tried to get their own permits to essentially counter-protest the pro-Hamas, the pro-jihadi crowd. The pro-hostage folks, they've had their permits denied. Funny, you might ask. I mean, it's the same people in the Chicago City Hall who are granting all these permits to the pro-Hamas crowd and are not giving out permits to the pro-Western civilization crowd. So, I mean, it couldn't happen to a nicer city, to be honest with you. They really have asked for this. But to your point, Rita, of course, if this were to have happened at the RNC in Milwaukee, it would make all the headlines. And, you know, the irony is they say that it actually is the Republican Party, the party of Donald Trump, that is the threat to democracy. They're the totalitarians. You know, they're the ones who are a threat to our constitutional order and all that we hold righteous and dear in this country, to truth, justice, liberty, and the American way and all of that. I'm sorry, there is one political party here that has literally hundreds of thousands of people flying the flags of U.S. recognized foreign terrorist organizations, and it is not the Republican Party. It is not the party of Donald Trump.
Meanwhile, protesters wasting no time getting their messages out to the thousands here in Chicago for the DNC. Demonstrators marching down our iconic Michigan Avenue. Look at the size of that crowd. This is following a rally in the heart of the city's downtown Loop neighborhood. So, Nick, how is the city planning on protecting the DNC, and how are they dealing with the protests that have already started, even though the DNC hasn't as of yet?
Hannah, good morning. First, to answer your first question, they plan on protecting the DNC and those attending the rally by making sure that demonstrators stay in designated areas. Police have already started shutting down roads and putting up barricades around the city, with protesters gearing up for a march and multiple rallies.
Tens of thousands, and we've had at least one estimate from a leader, an organizer, saying that as many as 100,000 anti-Israel protesters are expected to descend on the Democratic National Convention. Of course, we won't know those numbers until it actually begins, but they did have a news conference a short time ago, so we're getting an idea of why the city of Chicago is now bracing for all that anti-Semitism, Jewish hate, to turn violent. Businesses are already boarding up their windows and doors. Democrats reportedly checking into hotels under fake names in fear of their safety. So you've got Democratic voters now hiding. 250 Illinois National Guard men and women are currently on standby in Chicago. Protesters are chanting "Genocide Joe," at Joe Biden, and branding Vice President Kamala Harris a, quote, killer. And they're threatening to, quote, bring the war home.
Hannah, the demonstrations will take place each day of the convention, and organizers say they expect the crowds to be bigger than the ones held by the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee last month.
Look, I mean, it's joyful here, right? We're bringing war to you is one of the chants. From the river to the sea was chanted last night. So much for Kamala's joy. These are not joyful messages. But Kamala's trying to thread the needle. Buried in an Associated Press story was the fact that Kamala just met with the mayor of Dearborn, Michigan. His name is Abdullah Hammoud. He has statements in the past which I view as radical. On October 7th, that horrific day where those hostages were taken, he condemned all violence, but nevertheless said Israel's military occupation makes violence inevitable. I'm not surprised this meeting wasn't on her public schedule, but it was a behind-the-scenes effort to stop what you're watching on your screen. But will these protesters fall in line? More than 100,000 uncommitted voters in Michigan for this very reason. She needs the uncommitted voters to become Kamala voters. How does she do it? It's an impossible task.
Wow. So, Kaylee, I mean, when I hear the words inevitable violence, I mean, that sounds very threatening. And that certainly isn't the peaceful protesting that Leslie Marshall was so right about. Like, we all have the right to do that. She's right. But killer Kamala? I mean, it just, no matter what your politics are, Guy Benson, this is dirty. It's nasty, potentially dangerous. But we hear crickets from this presidential candidate. We hear crickets from her surrogates on this issue. Nobody wants to shut these people and their Jewish hate down.
All these internet gangsters, because that's what I call them, they're internet gangsters. They don't know what's going on. They've never been over to Gaza. They don't know what's going on in Gaza, really. They're just fighting because, quote unquote, they've seen this on TV. So the whole fact of what they're doing, they're taking over, we're in jail. Mm-hmm. I'm pretty sure you didn't want, my dog has no place to run. You know, this is crazy.
You said we're in what?
We're in jail.
Because of the protests?
Yeah, because of the DNC, the protests, all this is going on. Everything that's going on over here really has nothing to do with us. Mm-hmm. Basically, the things that's going on with these protesters, go do it in your neighborhood. If you got a voice and your voice can be heard, well, what's wrong with you doing it or stand in the park with it? Why do you have to? They scared the out of my son. Like, that's what made me mad. My son, we know the street, they marching down the street. They're supposed to march down the street. But when you got a gang of people coming at my child and you scare the out of my child, I don't give a damn what you protesting about. My family comes before anything.
How did they scare your child?
Because they come up, you've seen it, they come up the walkway, the street, everything. My child was out here riding his bike and all he see is 4,000 people coming up his walkway. How you think he's supposed to feel? You know, it's not. And then just because they're protesting, you know, our neighbors can't go to the grocery store. They're not getting their mail. It's just too much. It's too much in our area.
The war in Gaza. Mm-hmm. You've called for a ceasefire hostage deal and a two-state solution as an end to the war for many months now. And while you've expressed support for Israel to defend itself, a two-state solution and a ceasefire are at odds with what Benjamin Netanyahu has said is their right to defense. If it matters, as you say, how Israel defends itself, where do you see the line between aggression and defense? And our power as Israel's ally to do something?
Okay, a lot to unpack in what you just said. So let's start with this. I absolutely believe that this war has to end, and it has to end as soon as possible. And the way that will be achieved is by getting a hostage deal and a ceasefire deal done. And we are working around the clock to achieve that end. Stepping back, October 7, 1,200 Israelis were slaughtered, and actually and some Americans, by the way, in that number, slaughtered. Young people who were attending a concert, women were horribly raped. And yes, so I have said, Israel has a right to defend itself. We would. And,
but Madam Vice President, I think my ask is the difference between aggression and defense.
No, but it's important to put it in context, which is what I'm doing, and I'll get to that. And so how it does so matters. And far too many innocent Palestinians have been killed. Women and children. We have seen with horror the images coming out of Gaza. And we have to take that seriously. And we have to agree that not only must we end this war, but we have to have a goal of a two-state solution, because there must be stability and peace in that region, inasmuch as what we do in our goal is to ensure that Israelis have security and Palestinians in equal measure have security, have self-determination and dignity.
A question for you on that, though. What levers does the U.S. have to support Palestinians in their right to self-determination? And is it even possible as Israel's ally?
Well, absolutely. I will tell you, I have been actively involved in, for example, meeting not only with Israeli officials, but with Arab officials to talk about how we can construct a day after scenario where we participate in ensuring those exact goals that I outlined, including, as part of the principles that should be applied to those goals, that there be no reoccupation of Gaza, that there be no changing of the territorial lines in Gaza, that there be an ability to have security in the region for all concerned in a way that we create stability, and let us also recognize in a way that ensures that Iran is not empowered in this whole scenario in terms of the peace and stability of the region. But absolutely, the United States of America absolutely has a role, which is why we have been active, in particular with the Qataris and the Egyptians, around attempting to get a deal done and get it done as quickly as possible.
But Madam Vice President, just to follow up really quickly, is there a specific policy change that you, as President of the United States, would say you would do that would help this along? Because you've gotten a lot of credit for emphasizing the humanity of Palestinians. But what I often hear from folks is that there's no policy change that either you or President Biden have gone and said they would do. Is there a specific policy change as president that you would do in our helping of Israel?
We need to get this deal done, and we need to get it done immediately, and that is my position, and that is my policy. We need to get this deal done.
But in the way that we send weapons, in the way that we interact as their ally, are there specific policy changes?
Well, Eugene, for example, one of the things that we have done that I am entirely supportive of is the pause that we've put on the 2,000-pound bombs. And so there is some leverage that we have had and used. But ultimately, the thing that is going to unlock everything else in that region is getting this deal done. And I'm not going to disclose private conversations, but I will tell you, I've had direct conversations with the Prime Minister, with the President of Israel, with Egyptian leaders, and with our allies. And I think we've made ourselves very clear this deal needs to get done in the best interest of everyone in the region, including getting those hostages out who, I mean, we saw the latest example of what happened with the 6 most recently, one of whom was an American citizen.
But what do you say to those that say that's not enough, that stopping the 2,000-pound bombs the one time wasn't enough, that this administration, your possible administration, has to do more?
Well, we are doing the work of putting the pressure on all parties involved to get the deal done. But let me be very clear also. I support Israel's ability to defend itself. And I support the need for Palestinians to have dignity, self-determination, and security as we move forward and get a two-state deal done. But right now, the thing we need to get done is this hostage deal and this ceasefire deal. We need a ceasefire. We need the hostage deal.
They are tearing down and burning American flags and spray painting and advocating for Hamas. I mean, it is not subtle.
It's remarkable.
It's out in the open in our nation's capital. Wow. Let's bring in RNC spokeswoman and Jewish activist Elizabeth Pipko to react to all of this. And I just want to talk about that for a moment, because those scenes were striking, and you juxtapose that with what was happening inside the House chamber with big standing ovations for the leader of Israel, our ally. someone who was trying to split the difference of applauding Netanyahu and supporting Hamas is the Democratic nominee for president. Kamala Harris was off in Indiana at a midsummer sorority meeting. That's certainly a choice, isn't it?
It definitely is. Look, I've been asked countless times why I took this job, what people need to know about Kamala Harris, what is the choice right now in November, and I think the answer to all of that was on display today. I want everyone to understand the Prime Minister of Israel was here in the United States today, and regardless of what you think about him, he is the democratically elected leader of one of our strongest allies, right? He was here today speaking to the American people, and according to Axios, nearly half of elected Democrats were not in the room. Kamala Harris was not in the room. And again, when he was speaking to the American people, he was reminding them that their victory in Israel will be our victory. He was reminding them that he is fighting a war, that the Israelis are fighting a war right now, not just for themselves, but to bring home our American hostages, which have been held by this terrorist group for nearly 9 months now. And he was applauding those that stood with the American flag against violent protesters in the last 8 or 9 months in this country. And while he was doing that, Democrats were not in the room. The vice president was not in the room. And as you mentioned, outside of the room, we saw far left protesters burning the American flag.
The reason that they are there is because they can be. Because to Guy's point, there has been no condemnation clear from the vice president. They have absolutely been trying to curry favor and curry votes and thread that line that really actually isn't fragile. It really actually isn't anything less than a very clear line. And keep in mind, for example, the Uncommitted National Movement, which has just issued new demands to Kamala Harris this week. Now they say, well, we want a pediatrician that just returned from Gaza. We want a primetime speaking slot. We also want an arms embargo against Israel. The point I'm making is that they keep shifting the goalposts because, of course, as children do, they will keep asking for more when you hand to them what they've been seeking in petulance. So all of this, to me, is not only predictable, but it's unpalatable to the American people. And I hope, as this chasm is occurring on the streets of that manufactured convention, amidst the crime of Chicago, which we'll talk about later, I hope that someone has the fortitude to say this is unacceptable.
Amen. Well, today is all anyone needs to know about the state of American politics right now.
Elizabeth, she is pandering to try to win Michigan. At least that's how it seems right now. And she definitely drew a line in the sand today. It was after President Trump said that he would meet with Netanyahu later in the week, that she said later in the week she would have a meeting with him, too.
What I tell people all the time is this is not a Jewish issue, right? It's not just an issue for those who are of the Jewish faith or who support Israel. It's an American issue. What we saw today was an American problem, right? The leader of Israel was there, and they weren't burning Israeli flags, as bad as that would have been. They were burning American flags. Right. Because if you stand for this kind of hatred, you stand against the USA. Yeah. If you sprawl on a building that Hamas is coming, it means that you want the destruction of the United States of America, as Hamas wants to do to us here in this country the same thing they did to Israel on October 7th. So the problem is not just swinging the Jewish vote into the right. The problem is that any American with any sense of decency, with any sense of love for this country, and with any of the fundamental values that I assumed before this that we all shared, is going to swing against this kind of leadership, because this leadership is not only dangerous for our ally, Israel, it's dangerous for any American.
Well, it's Western civilization that they hate. They being the far left and the Islamists. That's the Hamas brigade here. And the U.S. and Israel are exemplars of Western civilization. That's what's at stake in that conflict.
It would have never happened. Iran was broke under Donald Trump. Now Iran has $300 billion because they took off all the sanctions that I had. Iran had no money for Hamas or Hezbollah or any of the 28 different spheres of terror. And they are spheres of terror, horrible terror. They had no money. It was a big story, and you know it. You covered it very well, actually. They had no money for terror. They were broke. Now they're a rich nation, and now what they're doing is they're spreading that money around. Look at what's happening with the Houthis and Yemen. Look at what's going on in the Middle East. This would have never happened. I will get that settled and fast, and I'll get the war with Ukraine and Russia ended. If I'm president-elect, I'll get it done before even becoming president.